taught you to hate the texture of your hair? Who taught you to hate the color of your skin to such extent that you bleach to get like the white man? Who taught you to hate the shape of your nose and the shape of your lips? Who taught you to hate yourself from the top of your head to the soles of your feet?
I love people as I meet them one by one. People are just wonderful as individuals. You see the whole...
My great aspiration, my greatest ambition is to be so good. Now, in that way, I'm tiresome, as I suppose, to live with, because I want to be a fantastic human being.
I am the greatest.
We're not disputing that, Cassius, but how does Sonny Liston feel about it?
He can't feel but one way, and let's take everything I say and like it. Because February the 25th, I'm going to take back my job. I'm the champ. He's no champ. He's a tramp.
When you see men fall, don't laugh. Learn. Learn. Because you're on your way up. And the things that tempt people to fall, you and I are not free from that temptation.
Peace and greetings, and glory, praise, and honor to the Most High. Without further ado, I want to introduce to you your host for this evening. Give her a round of applause, show some love. I will be in the background, of course. Any questions, comments, I leave it in her hands. This is going to be a very, very interesting educational segment. I'm looking forward to it. I just want to pull something up real quick, just in case y'all want to reach out. Miss Linguist, if you are in the building, I am bringing you up. I will let you do your thing.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sydney. I'm also known as the Science Squid Poetry on my various social media platforms. Currently, I'm on Blue Sky, Red Note, All Poetry, and one other that I'm blanking on right now. But today, I wanted to talk to you guys more about volcanoes. Because of the ongoing situation in Santorini, I wanted to update everyone on what's happening in Santorini, since so far there has not been an eruption, but things are still ramping up. So I thought it was still important to talk about. I didn't give it a full episode last time. I just kind of prefaced it before we got into the main story. But because of the fact that it's still ongoing, there's a lot of debate going on around what's happening at Santorini. I really wanted to talk about the situation and also just talk generally about the science of volcanoes and the human history of volcanoes that have impacted us and how it does impact society, just in case there does happen to be an eruption on Santorini. So first of all, if you aren't familiar with the island of Santorini, it's off the coast of Greece. It's one of the many, many islands off the coast towards the, north, towards the south. And Santorini is a volcanic island, as are many of the other surrounding islands in the area. Greece, Italy, and Turkey, all throughout that area. There's a whole volcanic chain because of the plate tectonics in that area. And currently, Santorini has been having an uptick in earthquakes. They've been having thousands of earthquakes over the course of the week, hundreds every single day. And there has been a notable increase in the magnitude of these earthquakes. Last week, when I talked to you, they were regularly having 2s, 3s, and starting to have 4s, but now they're starting to have 4s regularly, mid-range 5s. I believe this morning they had a 5.6, I believe. Let's see, we'll check. Yeah. And they've been having about 10,000 earthquakes over the course of the last week. A lot of them have been smaller, but it's still a signal that something is happening. The other notable aspect of these earthquakes is that they are on the move. Volcanologists have been obviously tracking the movement going on underneath, and they've found, I'm trying to pull up a picture of their earthquakes. They've kind of been moving towards the island. Before, they were happening a little bit out to sea. And my gosh, why aren't you cooperating? So I'm just going to demonstrate. So there's Santorini here. There's also another volcano kind of, wait, let's see, swap. Santorini would be here. And then there's another volcano nearby under the ocean. And the earthquakes have started kind of migrating towards the island, which is leading a lot of scientists to believe that the magma is either trying to seek out a location to erupt from, or it is propagating underneath Santorini and the magma is just rising underneath. They have found ground uplift in Santorini. Multiple locations around the coastline have been rising notably. You can actually, if you look up the geographical data from their version of USGS, they found that parts of their coastline have actually risen a couple inches to, I think one area was like up to like 6 inches to a foot of rise, which is not exactly a good sign when it is a volcano, because that does mean the land is being pushed upwards by the magma, or at least movement underneath. I've noticed a growing theory that a new volcano is being formed, and that is the cause of these volcanoes, that it's not actually Santorini, and it's not actually the other volcano whose name is slipping my mind at the moment. But they're starting to suggest that it's possible that another new volcano is forming under the sea, which would be quite fascinating because, at least from the scientific data that I've read, this would be the first time in human recorded history that they will have the access to something like that for them to study. If that does happen, it will take 1,000 years or more to develop like a full cone, like a traditional looking volcano. But that would be very scientifically beneficial for those that do study volcanoes, that want to understand more about the formation of volcanoes. But it still doesn't rule out the possibility of there being a volcanic eruption on Santorini or the nearby volcano. And so they've evacuated most of the island. I believe the numbers are up to 11,000 out of the 15,000 permanent residents have left the island. I know that there are still tourists there. I've seen multiple videos of tourists excitedly showing off that they have the whole island to themselves, which, in my personal opinion, I wouldn't stay there. I wouldn't really want to stay on top of a volcano if it was showing signs that it wanted to erupt. But to each their own. If you want to volcanic tourism, I guess now is the time to, to check it out. I don't advise going there, so don't do that. But there are people that are still there. So I do pray for them and hope that everything turns out okay and that there isn't a volcanic eruption. But that being said, I thought it would be very pertinent to kind of discuss the science behind volcanoes and also talk about some of the volcanoes we humans have experienced in the past, the impacts they've had on us, and if there was a volcanic eruption in Santorini, what one could expect from a larger eruption. So for Santorini, they have had a volcanic eruption in the past. I believe it was at least 2,000 years ago. Let me double check my date. They had a major earthquake in the 50s, but that one didn't result in a large eruption. The last time they had a major eruption was 1600 BCE, before current era. So that would be about 3,600 years ago. It was actually responsible for the destruction of the Minoan civilization that was living on that island. It used to be, if you ever look at the picture of Santorini, I'll actually send it to you. You can clearly see where, you can clearly see where the volcano erupted. It used to be a whole island, but now there is just a gigantic crater where that volcano is and used to be. That whole area exploded, and the people living on that island, if there was anybody left, there's evidence to show that they did flee the island before this eruption happened. But if there was anybody left on the island, they would not have survived something that severe. But there has been a very large eruption there before. There are also many other volcanoes that have had similar type eruptions in the past. The way that scientists measure the amount, the size of an eruption, is by the amount of tephra, or the amount of materials that explodes out of the volcano. There's a, if you want to pull up the chart, one of the misconceptions about keep saying earthquakes. I love earthquakes, by the way, so that's why I keep saying that. One of the misconceptions about volcanic eruptions is that it's measured by how much it explodes, but the eruption really is measured by how much material it explodes out into the sky, how much it releases in the span of its eruption. So smaller eruptions, non-explosive eruptions, such as ones that you would see in Hawaii, that kind of, they leak out, they don't really explode outwards. They release only a small amount of materials over the course of time. Usually those types of volcanoes are on, oh yeah, that's in the picture, you can see the old, that circular area in the middle of the island was where the volcano basically erupted and then collapsed in on itself. It was very similar in style to what happened to Krakatoa, which I'll discuss a little later. But that whole area basically blew out in that eruption. And so that one, I believe they classified it as a high 6 to 7 based on their estimates, which is a quite substantial eruption. They vary between a 0 and on the chart it says 7, but technically they can go up to an 8. A VEI 8 would be absolutely planetary devastating. It would devastate the ecosystem. Because when you release this material into the air, not only is it causing damage to the nearby landscapes, and obviously as they get bigger, you're going to impact larger and larger areas outside of the blast zone, but also it releases it up into the atmosphere. And if you have a extremely huge explosion shooting rocks and ash and soil and molten material out into the atmosphere, it's going to enter the upper atmospheric systems, the stratosphere, and kind of spread out across the globe. That's why, if you're ever familiar with volcanoes, what the term volcanic winter, also for similar reasons like the nuclear winter, the amount of stuff it ejects into the atmosphere will block out the sun in large parts of the earth, depending on the size. And that's what can make these volcanic eruptions so devastating. When you release that amount of material and prevent more sunlight from entering into our to the lower areas of our earth, it gets much colder. You're more likely to have plant die-offs because they don't have solar access for their photosynthesis. So a lot of plants will die. And then obviously, if the plants die, the animals don't do very well. So larger eruptions, VEI 6, VEI 7, VEI 8s, they can be very detrimental to the ecosystem for many years. Mount Pinatubo is a really good example of that. It was a relatively small eruption. It was about a VEI 5. There's some argument within the community that it could have even been like a high 4. But it released enough tephra into the atmosphere to actually lower the Earth's temperature for about 2 years. It affected the growing season, especially in that part of the world, in Asia and Europe, but it did have notable impacts around the rest of the world. It made things noticeably cooler, and it left basically a climate marker, where scientists in the future will be able to use Mount Pinatubo to understand when they are analyzing soil layers, rock layers. They'll be able to use Pinatubo to kind of pinpoint, okay, so this happened, and you can see in the rock layer that the ash from that volcano would be there. And Mount Pinatubo was a similar type of volcanic eruption to the one that would happen in Santorini, if there was a volcanic eruption there. It's known as a Plinian eruption. Those are the most notable types that people typically think of, where there's the whole ash column that goes up into the sky. And usually those volcanoes tend to be like the pointy volcanoes with the flat top, like the very majestic type looking volcanoes that everyone always pictures whenever they think of one. But they also tend to be highly explosive, and they tend to eject a lot more tephra into the atmosphere. So more often they have longer lasting impacts than some of the other types of volcanoes. There's another type of, the Hawaiian volcanoes is another one. Those usually happen where there's plate boundaries that are kind of moving apart from each other, because it allows the molten rock to kind of ooze out from the earth, kind of in the same way as if you have a cut on your skin. If you have a minor cut, not on an artery, it's just going to kind of bubble out of your body. And that's kind of the same mechanisms for that type of eruption. They typically don't release a lot into the sky. They are also far more frequent. Usually, like the explosive eruptions, they take a lot longer to kind of happen because it requires a lot more force to kind of break out of their the rock dome that's covering the volcano. And so they basically build stress and build stress and build stress, and then finally one day they'll explode. There's also another type that is it's explosive, but they don't really have as much ash coming out of it. They're more so like fiery kind of. They have more of the like lava coming out rather than ash and dirt clouds. And those ones are more of the, if anyone has been to New Zealand, they have volcanoes that kind of look like that, where you have like the lava fountains kind of like shooting up into the sky. And then there's a couple other types, which they're a little less distinct for me to explain, but they have varying levels of explosivity, and it's largely based on the type of material that they're releasing. So it's kind of hard for me to explain exactly what the difference is between them, but largely the main difference is the way you can kind of understand the type of volcano is the amount of materials that it's releasing, the length of time that it's erupting, the frequency of it erupting, and the types of rock that are coming out of it. The explosive eruptions are going to have more like pumice because of the how fast it happens. The rocks enter the atmosphere and super cool, and when they cool down really fast, it allows them to still trap those air bubbles. So that's why pumice stone is very light, and you can even float it on water, because it did not have the chance to harden. Whereas if you get lava rock from Hawaii, it's a rock. It's a very hard, tough rock, and it'll sink. It's not going to float. So those are some of the ways that you can kind of distinguish between the types of volcanoes, is the types of rock, the types of explosions, and and the amount of material that it's releasing. The most recent severe volcano that we have experienced in our lifetime is the Hunga Tonga Hunga Hapai eruption, which happened off the coast in the Pacific Ocean. It was most close to New Zealand, and it thankfully was an undersea volcano, and so it didn't have as much phreatic release, like it didn't release as much material into the air. But what it did do is it did cause tsunamis. There were tsunamis that propagated all the way in Tonga, Fiji, Samoa, Vanuatu, a lot of the islands, New Zealand, Japan, the United States, Russia, Chile, Peru. So there were a number of areas that were hit by between there was an island called Tofua, and they had the highest wave at 148 feet. Tonga had 66 feet. Peru had only about 6 feet. But that is one of the dangers of undersea volcanoes, even though it's not going to be releasing as much rock and ash into the atmosphere. It could still cause a tsunami, which is the risk that Santorini holds, unfortunately, because Santorini, most of the volcanic area is underwater. So that is actually the higher concern. It's not, of course, the explosivity of this volcano is a risk, but they're more concerned about a tsunami if they were to have an eruption. And as well as, let me look up the name of the volcano again, just to, I don't know why I'm forgetting right now. Can I not remember right now?
Take your time. You got it.
I've been
You
like
got it.
thinking about this all day, and then magically the name just like leaves my head.
It's a lot of information to get out there. I understand.
Yeah. Let me just look it up on here.
Just on a side note, there was a story a while back. I guess it was more like a conspiracy theory type of a statement. I don't know how accurate it was, but
Mm-hmm.
it was speaking about Yellowstone.
Oh yes.
If Yellowstone actually erupted.
Yes. I would be happy to talk about that. So I can't believe I forgot. It's also the name of a show. It's called the Colombo volcano. It's just off the coast of Santorini. And just to kind of show you where it's located. So there's Athens is up there, and then Santorini is that little volcano where it says Fira. That is Santorini, and then Colombo is right next to it. So the risk of a tsunami is quite significant with this one should it erupt. The super volcano, that one is definitely one that comes up. Yellowstone is located on top of a volcanic, it's actually moved over the course of time, but it has had regular eruptions every, I believe its general rate is like every 600,000 years. And I think some of the gaps were as much as like 1.2 million years. But the Yellowstone eruption would be classified as a VEI 8. Super eruptions are very, very significant, not only because the way that they form is different than the way typical volcanoes form, because they're not really a split in the earth where lava like bubbles up. It's literally like a huge caldera of magma. So it's massive. There's a really cool image. Let me see. So let's see. There it is. So you can actually see that's how it has moved over time. So over, let's see, 12 million years ago, there was one, it was kind of over by Oregon, and then it moved across Idaho, and now it's more into Montana. But you can definitely see how big these calderas are, how much magma that would be to cover such a huge part of the state. And so currently it is over by Yellowstone right now. The last one was, it looks like 2.6 million years ago. But the problem with those is it basically like unzips the ground. It releases a whole ton of magma, more than a ton. It's on a magnitude beyond anything we could possibly understand. If there was a Yellowstone volcanic eruption, there is a really good documentary on it, a documentary movie with the same name that shows what would happen, but it would crash the ecosystems across the world. There would be ash clouds covering the earth for years on end. We would be in almost darkness for a substantial period of time. It's hard to say exactly how bad it could get because obviously we've never experienced one in our lifetime. But there is a theory that around 12,000 years ago or so, there was a extremely dramatic decline in the human population, which left us with only about 10,000 humans. All of the humans on Earth today are descendants of those 10,000 individuals, and it's believed that an eruption was responsible for that genetic bottleneck because it would have been tremendously hard to survive something like that. It would have probably driven people underground. It would have completely destroyed any agricultural progress we had made. We would have had to survive on whatever was left. And the amount of destruction to the surrounding area, it would be extremely hard to survive, especially with how technology dependent we would be. We wouldn't be able to fly our planes. We wouldn't be able to use machinery. When there is that amount of ash in the sky, not only does it affect, it like covers the ground, it blocks the sun. It also would do damage to our lungs if we were to breathe it in. The ash, it looks soft and fluffy. Like if you've ever touched ash from a fireplace, it seems really innocent, I would say. But it's actually quite sharp. If you look at it under a microscope, it looks like shards of glass. And that's essentially what it is. It's super cooled shards of stone that you'd be breathing in. And so it does cause severe damage to your lung tissues. So a lot of people in the surrounding areas would not do well. It's definitely not something you want to be exposed to. And it also causes, because of how it's super dry and it has all of these like metals and other materials in it, it also is very conductive. So you'd also see very vibrant lightning, very strong, intense lightning in the area and many miles outwards. There's very vibrant thunderstorms and weather during the time after volcanoes. The famous painting of like the scream where the person's like, but it's the painting and then there's like really vibrant, bright skies above him. They believe that was depicting the time period after a major eruption that did impact the climate for about 2 to 5 years based on certain estimates. So it does have really, really severe impacts on the higher end of the spectrum. The most recent volcanic eruption that people would probably know about would be either Mount St. Helens if you're in the United States, or Mount Pinatubo if you're in Asia or the surrounding area. Mount St. Helens was about a high VEI 4 to a VEI 5, depending on which scientist you ask. One of the things that makes Mount St. Helens eruption quite unique is it exploded outwards rather than up, which they believe had a positive impact because it exploded to the side. It prevented it from getting ejected into the atmosphere, and so it didn't have as strong of an impact on our climate as it could have. But it was still very destructive nonetheless. There was a picture we brought up earlier showing a bunch of trees. kind of look like nothing, but those are all trees just blasted down by the volcanic energy, the pyroclastic flow, the ash cloud, and the force of the volcanic eruption was tremendous. One of the things that actually got me into natural disasters in general was the story of one of the photographers that passed away while photographing Mount St. Helens. He took some famous photos of the ash cloud coming towards him, and when the eruption started, he gave a radio transmission saying, Vancouver, Vancouver, this is it. And those are his last words, because within like 15 seconds, the ash cloud reached him and he passed away. He was over 6 miles away from the volcano, but it still reached him like that. And for those of you that aren't familiar with the pyroclastic flow, the ash clouds that come out of these volcanoes, they are thousands of degrees. They are extremely hot rocks, and they can go as fast or faster than a car on the freeway. They can, I believe the one on Mount St. Helens reached like 64 miles an hour. So if you are unprepared, if you are on foot, it's very unlikely that you'll be able to get out of the way on time unless you are far out of the vicinity of that volcano, or you're very, very lucky. It's not very, if you're near a volcano like that, an explosive eruption, it's very hard to survive. Mount St. Helens took the life of about 69 people. Most of them were like hikers, loggers, individuals that were in the surrounding area. But it did take people by surprise because of the type of eruption that happened. Basically, the mountain started to swell outward, and once it reached a certain point, the entire side of the mountain collapsed. There's a really cool picture. If you want to pull it up, it's the quadrant one, the one that's in 4s. They got some really amazing photos. So this was one of the best photographed eruptions that has happened in recent years. But you can actually see the mountain collapsing in those photos. And that's why it ended up exploding outwards to the side rather than upwards, because that landslide basically allowed it to release the pressure off the flank of the volcano instead of out the top. But it definitely features the immense power that volcanoes can have. That if you can just picture you can see in the images the size of the trees in comparison to the mountain size, and to see the amount of rock that had been moved during that eruption, it's crazy to think about how much power that would require to move a literal mountain like that. And that was only a VEI 5. So if you can even imagine what a 6, 7, 8 would be, it's very mind-boggling to imagine what the Earth can generate. The other one that would be in more recent memory for people would be Mount Pinatubo. The Mount St. Helens happened in 1980. And then Mount Pinatubo happened in 1991. There's some fantastic images of the ash cloud reaching up into the sky, and you can actually see it hitting the top layer of the stratosphere, and kind of the top of the column gets flat, and you can kind of see where it hits the next layer of the atmosphere, which I always thought was really cool. But Mount Pinatubo is a fantastic example of the climatic impacts that can occur. It actually, so this is the Mount St. Helens eruption, and you can see within a minute, basically. The entire flank of the mountain just collapsed down onto itself, and then it released its power outwards. The smoke and billowing area, that is the ash cloud. That's the pyroclastic flow and whatnot that I was mentioning. But that will travel at about like 60 miles an hour, sometimes more. But you do not want to get stuck in that. As I said, that can be thousands of degrees, that can cook you in an instant. And if it gets in the engine of vehicles, planes, stuff like that, it'll choke the engines, and planes will fall out of the sky. The cars will stop working. And it's not really something you can outrun. So if there is a volcanic eruption pending, I would not try and check it out. I would stay as far away as possible, because you don't want to risk being caught in a disaster like that. But that, I always think the pictures of that eruption are so cool to see, just to kind of try and visualize the immense power that these volcanoes have. And I think on that same page is the images of the trees. I don't know if it's that same web page, or if I know you brought it up earlier. But if you look at both the Mount St. Helens and Mount Pinatubo, if you look at the forest afterwards, they look like chopsticks. Like the trees are just these gray little sticks lying all over the ground. And just the amount of power it would take to completely decimate miles and miles of forest is just astounding to me. Even as much as I research this stuff, it still amazes me to see pictures of these forests just completely knocked down as if they're toothpicks from these types of eruptions. And they also show why you don't want to be near a volcano when they happen like that. Let me see. The most famous, I think, eruption that I think most people would know about is Mount Vesuvius, Pompeii. It also destroyed other nearby cities, Herculaneum, Aplantis, and Stabiae. That volcano was also estimated to be about a VEI 6. So it would have been similar in size to Mount St. Helens, but probably a bit bigger. I think Mount St. Helens was more of a 5. Mount Vesuvius, I think, would be more of a 6. But Mount Vesuvius is arguably the most famous because it left behind evidence of its victims that you can still see to this day. Because it happened so quickly, people didn't have the time to really get out in time, especially because most of these locations were right by the ocean, so they didn't really have anywhere to go to. And so you can go to Pompeii today and you can see the plaster casts of the victims that died in the volcano. They basically got covered over by the pyroclastic flow, and scientists filled in those gaps left by the people that had died. And so then you can actually see the people that and how they had died, or like their last moments. And it let me see. Let me pull up a picture of them, because I think it's really sad, but it's very cool to be able to understand exactly what these individuals went through. Let me pull it. It's like, so these are some of the people Here's another. Like you can even see the clothes that they were wearing. You can see their facial features. It's for volcanologists, it's incredibly useful and very interesting to see because not only are they able to see like where the victims were, and so you can kind of understand more about what happened, the series of events, but you can also understand what happened in their bodies because it was preserved. So they're actually able to go in and look at their bones and look at their teeth and look at things about the people to understand the impact that the volcano had on them as they were dying, like what caused their death and stuff like that, which is very useful for the future because then they can understand how to keep people more safe during volcanic eruptions. But it was incredible because the way the volcano erupted, the way the ash fell on the city, and how quickly people and the whole town got covered, it basically preserved entire portions of the city. And people didn't go back and live there for a very long time. And so a lot of those areas were very well preserved. So it's a fantastic place to study for volcanologists and for historians alike. One of the interesting things that I know about that whole situation is people in Vesuvius, they were feeling these earthquakes, and a lot of people fled to Herculaneum, to the seaside town, and they were trying to escape on boats. And that's where a majority of the victims ended up being found, was in the town of Herculaneum. So even though Pompeii is more notable, Herculaneum had more victims preserved. And Herculaneum was a trading town, and so you actually have a lot of preserved goods from that time period as well. I also want to feature my personal volcano. She's very destructive, and as you see, she has a lot of magma coming from her head. Also, speaking of destruction and really crazy facts, Krakatoa is my personal favorite. That volcano happened in 79 AD was Pompeii. Krakatoa happened in 1883, and that one was it produced the largest noise. Okay. All right, go play. It produced the loudest noise ever recorded. When Krakatoa erupted, the sounds were actually recorded on phonographs, or I forgot what they were called, but like sound recording devices that existed in Boston, in the United States. And Krakatoa, for those of you that aren't aware, is in Indonesia. So it literally traveled almost across the entire globe. For this is the loud eruption that I deal with all the time. Krakatoa was the largest, most recent volcano. It would have been classified as a high 6, possibly a 7. And it actually caused what we call the Little Ice Age, where we went through a period of about 5 to 10 years where things would not grow, the skies were dark, and it's probably what was responsible for the skies in the Scream painting that I was mentioning. Let me pull it up. Because when you have that amount of ash in the sky, it produces extremely brilliant sunsets. And so that painting was kind of depicting the sunsets that were occurring during that time period. And it's believed that it was the Krakatoa eruption. There are a couple other candidates, but Krakatoa is one of the ones that they believe was responsible for creating those brilliant sunsets. It was so loud that if you were nearby at all, like if you were within miles of that volcano, it would have actually ruptured your eardrums and you could have possibly gone deaf as a result of that eruption, and it completely destroyed the island. There was no island left until I believe the 1940s, when the new volcano, Anak Krakatau, which means son of Krakatoa, finally made its appearance out of the ocean. And it has since been erupting fairly consistently. And it has a pretty substantial peak now. I think it's now at least 1,000 feet over above the surface of the ocean now. And the reason why they're kind of classifying it as a new volcano is the original volcano, Krakatoa, it collapsed in on itself. And so now there's like a new magma chamber in its place. So now it's classified as a new volcano. But that is very common. Yeah, so that's, you can see the island before, and now it's just the 3 little islands. And then Anak Krakatoa, you can see, is just that little bitty spot in the center. But it basically blew apart that whole middle section. And as I said, it lowered the temperature of the earth. It caused vibrant sunsets. It killed quite a lot of people as well. I don't know if they, let me see what they they say that it killed about 36,000 people, but the majority of the deaths were caused by tsunamis, rather than the volcano itself. The tsunami itself was absolutely shocking. It was 30 meters, which is in feet. It's about 100 feet. So a lot of these areas are low-lying islands. So 100 feet of water is going to be very damaging. That we're lucky it was in 1883 and not 1993 because there would have been a lot more people that would have been affected by that. And if I remember correctly, there were tidal changes around the world. Like this volcanic eruption caused tsunamis that reached Alaska and Russia and California. So it was a very, very substantial eruption. And let's see. What else is I going to add? What's the other one? Oh, I just heard about this one. There's another volcano in Papua New Guinea, I believe. It was in 1951. There was a massive explosive eruption in Lamington, Papua New Guinea. This one speaks to the risk that was also the same thing that happened in Pompeii. One of the sad things is a lot of people will settle on volcanoes because they're beautiful. They have rich soil. They have volcanic soil is one of the most nutritious to plants that you could possibly get. And so farmers love volcanic soil for their plants. And especially if there's no history of any eruptions that is known. One of the dangerous things that can happen is because of the type of volcanoes they are, because of the type of soil, people love to settle around the outer edges of the volcano. And if you don't know that it's a volcano, that can obviously kill you. That's exactly what happened in Pompeii. It was quiet for a long period of time, and so people settled around the cone of the volcano. It was fantastic for their olive trees. It was fantastic for their other vegetables and plants. The same thing happened in Lamington. They settled around this volcano, and they did not know that it was a volcano. But there was an explosive eruption, and it killed over 3,000 people. That is one of the big dangers with volcanoes, is oftentimes they don't know that there is a volcano there until it erupts. There's another famous story in China. There was a rice farmer that one day he started noticing smoke coming up from the middle of his field, and literally within 2 months he had 1,000-foot volcano coming out of his field. And since then, I think it's now like 4,000 feet tall. So it can actually, volcanoes can form and, oh, sorry, it was not China, it was Mexico. Paracutin. It erupted over the span of 9 years and is now 1,300 feet tall. But that is one of the dangers of volcanoes, is that it can come without warning. You can not know that you have a volcano underneath you, and then suddenly one day you're like, why, where's the smoke coming from? Why is there fumes coming out of the ground? Luckily, most volcanoes tend to happen on tectonic plates. So if you're in areas that are already mountainous or already prone to earthquakes or are well known for having like hot springs and stuff like that, those are good indicators that the chances of a volcano being there are more likely. There are obviously rare occasions where they just kind of appear out of nowhere, as it did in Paracutan, but it is in Mexico. Mexico is a highly tectonic volcanic area. So it was probably because at the time they didn't have the technology to understand what was underneath them. With today's technology, the chances of a volcano just like sprouting up in the middle of your house is pretty unlikely. But it is still a risk to think about, especially if you live in a volcanically or tectonically active area, especially if you live in the mountains, or on a mountain, a particularly majestic cone-shaped mountain. I would definitely look into the history of your area if you happen to live on a pretty cone-shaped mountain with a lot of vegetation, because there's a good chance that it might have erupted at some point. You might want to prepare yourself. But the one nice thing about volcanoes, unlike earthquakes and tsunamis and sometimes tornadoes, I guess, they don't really come out of nowhere. Usually they give you plenty of warning before they start to do anything. You're going to have a growing intensity of earthquakes. You're going to see potentially fissures opening up in the ground, gases coming out of the ground, which is exactly what's happening in Santorini right now. You can actually see like clouds of smoke and dust coming out of the ground. They're having the intensification of earthquakes. But earthquakes are one of the big indicators. If you are on a mountain and you start having a lot of earthquakes, and I don't mean like, oh, you have an earthquake and then you have an earthquake and then you have I mean like thousands of earthquakes. There's a good chance there's something happening underneath. I would definitely advise anybody, if they are in Santorini, planning to go near Santorini, I wouldn't go there right now. It's not the time to go try and test your luck. It could take weeks. It could be days. We don't know per se. Scientists still don't agree on what exactly is happening. I've been seeing a lot of different theories coming out. There really doesn't seem to be a lot of agreement within the scientific community. I've been seeing the word unprecedented thrown around a lot, which scientists don't typically like to do. So I do find that kind of interesting, seeing the lack of agreement within the scientific community. But personally, just from what I know, it seems to me like a volcano is planning to erupt soon. I can't say which one, because as I said, like it does seem to be underneath the Colombo volcano just as much as it could be affecting Santorini, but Santorini's showing signs of uplift. So not quite sure what I make of that whole situation, but I just given the fact that they're having many earthquakes and are getting into the dangerous sized category, that they're reaching 5s and possibly could be getting up to 6s, which are like once you get up to 6, 7s, that's when you start to have very damaging building destroying potential. So even if there is no eruption that comes out of it, just the earthquakes alone would be quite hazardous, especially because looking at the buildings, they do seem to be like stone or wooden buildings, which stone buildings don't do very well in earthquakes. But generally, it's good to be aware of what's around you, because with volcanoes, it's hard to predict. You can't really, there's no like timer on the side of the volcano that's going to let you know, like, hey, in the next like 12 years, you can expect an eruption of this size. Like, there's even earthquakes are notoriously hard to predict. They could think that they come on a certain interval, but then you go, I mean, California is still waiting for the big one, and we've been hearing about the big one since I was born. And we still haven't really had the big one yet. So it's notoriously hard to predict what's going to happen. And I personally just pray for everyone in Santorini. And as much as I would absolutely love to witness a volcanic eruption like that in my lifetime, I pray that it doesn't. Obviously, if that does happen, it would have tremendous impacts on the economy, on people that live there, on our weather systems, on a lot of things. So, yeah, I definitely hope that nothing does happen, but be aware, keep yourself safe, stay away from there if you aren't from there. If you are from the area and you can offer a space for these people to stay, because currently 14 or 13,000 people don't really have a place to go right now. So if you're able to help out these individuals, I would do so. But yeah, a lot to talk about. Did you have any specific questions? I know I covered.
I think you answered the majority of mine. And really, it made me think about something that you had said on a prior show. I think it was about the I think that was my question. It was about the lithium fire.
Mm-hmm.
With the gases and the things that you were referring to then, with the different elements and atoms and things of that nature, are
Mm-hmm.
these the same chemicals or the same molecules that's within this gas that comes from these eruptions too, or are these completely different?
It does vary by the location. Different there I was just watching a documentary the other day, and they're saying that you can tell which volcano erupted based on the composition of the rocks. But there are general rules of thumb. Like one of the most like common, like across the board, carbon dioxide, water vapor, and sulfur are going to be in pretty much any volcanic eruption. Hydrogen sulfide is another one that's very, very common. That's when if you've ever seen Dante's Peak, when the river, or I mean, when the lake turns to acid, that is hydrogen sulfide mixed with water turned into sulfuric acid. Um, other elements on their own obviously aren't damaging to us, but in high quantities or mixed together, it can be, like nitrogen, argon, helium, neon, methane, carbon monoxide. That one's obviously dangerous to us. Hydrogen, and then you can also get a lot of like in the volcanic gases. There's hydrogen chloride, hydrogen fluoride, hydrogen bromide, carbonyl sulfide, and then you can also get CFCs, which are the stuff that you'd find in like light bulbs and batteries, mercury, oxides. So it does depend on which ones that which volcanoes are erupting, but typically for explosive eruptions, you're more likely to get the like carbon monoxide acid type producing ones, and in general, it's I hate to say that it's more dangerous, because the less effusive eruptions are still dangerous in their own ways. For example, there was a town that kind of got gassed out because they didn't know that they were on the side of an eruption, or on the side of a volcano, and like it like seeped into the air, and they died because of that. And they didn't even like get burned or anything. But there's a lot of like chemicals that can come out of a volcano that are not good for your lungs. So yeah, there's it's hard to say across the board like what you'll kind of find at each volcano, because they are all going to be different based on like the fault line that they're on, the type of rocks that they're in, what the mountain is made out of, and even like what there is to burn on the side of the mountain. But the most notable one that everyone knows is sulfur, sulfides, stuff like that, because that is that's actually why it's associated with hell, because that's kind of what volcanoes are, the opening to hell. The stuff that goes into the atmosphere is usually like sulfur dioxide. That's the one that blocks out the sun's rays very effectively. The carbon dioxide, the water vapor, that also helps bounce light out. Those are the ones that are more responsible for the atmospheric effects.
Okay. I'm impressed.
Thank you.
I was thinking about Dante's Peak earlier.
It's a good
movie. That was my movie, man. And that scene that you just spoke on, I always wondered, how is it possible for that much water to become acid like that? I didn't know if that was just, I know, well, it's a movie, so I get that part, but like when the lady was stupid and she jumped off the boat to try to walk the rest of the way to, I'm like, wow, okay, this is real.
That was.
I thought it was just hot. I didn't realize. Was it?
Yeah. There's a volcano in Russia called Lake Kamchatka, and the volcanic blast basically turned the local lake into a chemical soup, and it basically became acidic. Also, if if a fissure opens up underneath the lake, it can also superheat the lake and turn it boiling. That's what hot springs are, basically. If anyone's been to Yellowstone, you can see that there's some that are like so hot that you'd cook yourself alive, but then there's some that are like just 100 degrees and you can swim in it. But you can have the like it even shows it in the film. It ruptured underneath the lake and it started to really, like, that's what killed the couple at the beginning, where it like superheated the water. And then the grandmother, when she passed away, was because it mixed with the stuff coming out of the volcano and it allowed it to turn to sulfuric acid. And it actually wouldn't have actually dissolved the boat because aluminum is not able to be dissolved by sulfuric acid just from how basic it is, but it still it definitely would have caused those burns on her. Like, she would have definitely died from that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it looks like
I know
a couple others. There's a Crater Lake in Mexico, ended up having a pH of 0.5. Water, I think, is like it's supposed to be 5. It's just 5. Mount Pinatubo's Crater Lake reached 1.9. I think lemon juice is like a 3 or 4 or something like that. Yeah. So pretty severe. Yeah, that is a good movie, good depiction. I also really like the movie Super Volcano, which is it's not going to happen like that. Like, the chances of the Mount Yellowstone erupting is very, very unlikely in our lifetimes. But it is a really great depiction of what can happen if a volcano were to erupt. And the Dante's Peak was actually based on a number of different, like, they used a lot of elements from real volcanic eruptions. So I also really like that. I have a ranking that I did once of all my favorite disaster movies, and I think I put Dante's Peak as like a 7.5 out of 10 in terms of like accuracy and enjoyment. So if you guys get a chance, Dante's Peak is a great movie. Super Volcano is also a great movie. I think you can find them both on YouTube.
I might. That's going to be on my next list. I've done a top 10. I've done a top 10 for villains. I've done a top 10 for TV show dads. I've done a top 10 for action movies. That was just last week. But disaster movies, I haven't done one on that one yet.
I would love to do that. There is another. There's a volcano movie where it like erupts underneath LA. That one's not as accurate. It's a good movie, but it's not as accurate.
That's the one with
Tommy
my
Lee
man.
Jones.
I love that. Yeah. Now that yeah. We gotta talk about it.
Definitely.
That
I'm always
I'm gonna jot that one down. Anything that you want to say to the people before we close out?
In general, don't go to Santorini just to see it erupt. You definitely don't want to test Earth like that. And yeah, just be aware of your surrounding areas. Here, let me suggest some apps. Volcanoes and earthquakes. Pull this up. It's literally just called Volcanoes and Earthquakes, and then it has that symbol. I really like that app. It has not only shows fault lines and volcanoes, it shows earthquakes and where they're happening. It shows the likelihood of eruptions, or like whether or not they are erupting. So that one's a really great resource for earthquakes. If you're in California, MyShake is a really good one. That one's done by Berkeley Science. And I also really like the app. It's just called Earthquake. And they show all of the recent earthquakes. And yeah, so those are some really good resources if you want to understand the tectonics that are around you, the earthquakes, volcanoes that are nearby, and or if you're traveling, very, very important to keep up to date with any volcanoes that are erupting, because they can impact your travel plans. And yeah, other than that, like, volcanoes are definitely not something that you should be terrified of all the time. You shouldn't not go to sleep at night just because you're worried about a volcano, because chances it doesn't happen all that often. The chances of like a super volcano just randomly erupting is very slim. There would be a lot of signs leading up to it. Scientists would for sure be on top of something like that. There's a very slim chance that we'd be surprised by a massive, massive volcano and we'd all die by volcano. So don't put that on your top 10 list of fears, because it's definitely not something you should lose sleep over. But just keep up to date and learn more about them, because volcanoes are really, really cool things to educate yourself on. And there's some really amazing stories out there about volcanoes, people that have witnessed them and the type of power that they have. And it's just humbling. Like it's just really cool to learn about something so much bigger than you are and so much more powerful. And it makes you really happy to be alive and happy to be a human at this time period and not be as at the mercy of what this earth can offer us. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed my podcast. If you have any questions or you want me to talk about something specifically about volcanoes or just generally, feel free to let one of us know. As you know, I love to ramble on and on about natural disasters and science and whatnot. So I'd be happy to discuss anything that you guys are interested in. So thank you.
And thank you for sharing your knowledge with us.
Absolutely.
Absolutely enjoyed this segment. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Peace and blessings to you, everybody that's watching. I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. We will be back tomorrow. So lock in. The virtual open mic is Friday. So make sure you tap in. This is going to be a goodie. I'm excited for it. Yeah. That being said, man, yeah, I enjoy y'all evening. My soundboard acting up, so I ain't been able to mess around with it. So I can't do my I know. But y'all be easy, man. I see y'all on the flip.
See you guys Friday.